Hi, I'm Annie Botticelli, and this is the Storyteller Forecast for November 2015, the astrology that will be affecting all signs. I will still be doing individual videos to drill down into the specifics for each sign, but I'm trying on a new format that will allow me to cover the general astrology in this one video and then just focus on what makes the readings different for each sign in the specific videos for each sign. So check out my website, aspiritualspark.com, where you can see more about my growing list of self-development tools to assist you in creating your best life. And while you're there, definitely sign up for my free email newsletter, which makes you part of my community and comes with all kinds of perks. So what is going on in the month of November? The first notable thing is that this is the first full month where we are free from personal planets being retrograde. And this is the first time that this is going on in many months, probably about 6 months, because once we started to get into the end of springtime, we started to have Mercury retrograde, then we had Venus retrograde, then we had Mercury retrograde again. And so now at the end of October, we finally were lifted from this focus on going backwards that became the theme of all of these months with the personal planets retrograde. And now November brings us into this awesome, gorgeous, open highway of a time to launch new things, to bring out creations, to try new things, to blaze forward and make major progress, especially in the areas that you've spent all this time going backwards looking at. Now you're ready to take these things that you've worked on for all this time and push them forward. So this is a really exciting time, and I highly encourage you to get as much done and moving forward in this month as possible, because once we get into December, after the first week or so, we start the Mercury retrograde shadow again, and we start our cycle of things going a little haywire, communications being weird, the focus going on backwards, energies. So we have these short windows of time where it's just really time to pop, to burst forth. And the way that I liken the importance of focusing on these energies is with this idea of someone being stuck on a deserted island, and they've made a boat and they want to get off the island. Now, if you've spent all this time making the boat and you really got to make this count when you're trying to get off the island, you're not going to set your boat in motion when the tide is coming in. That would be ridiculous. You would wait until the tide was going out to give yourself the best chance to be lifted out into sea and hopefully to become free and get rescued or whatever. So this is the type of explanation that really encapsulates why we use astrology and why it's important to focus on astrology, because if you spend a whole lot of time and energy on trying to push something forward when the energies are moving backwards, your energies are going to be thwarted, the outcomes of your results are going to be minimized, and you're going to have a lot of aggravation and stress, and things are going to be out of your control and not happen the way you're trying to make them generally anyway. So when we have these months like November, it's so important to take advantage of just doing as much as possible. And this is especially predominant in the first 3 weeks of November, where we have literally all green lights. It's so unusual that this happens in the stars, because even when we have a group of time when the personal planets are retrograde, the personal planets being the planets that are closer to the sun, so specifically Mercury, Venus, and Mars are the ones that go retrograde, that dramatically affect our day-to-day experience. So even though there's sometimes a chunk of time where the personal planets are going direct, it's rare that within that time we have a string of 3 weeks where everything is just on go. You know, it's the kind of energy where when you get that one green light, and then because of that all the rest of the lights are timed, and you get all the green lights, and you're like, whoa, what usually takes me an hour just totally took me 35 minutes, because you're in the flow. So the theme, the energy of this first 3 weeks for all signs is that you're in the flow, you're in the groove, you're on the hopscotch, you're jumping rope, you know, whatever it is that gets that momentum going. That's the energy of the first 3 weeks. And part of why we have this energy is because of a series of interactions between the planets in favorable angles. So when there's a series of favorable angles between the planets as they're joining, it just brings the energy of moving forward. And specifically, we have a ton of 60-degree angles. 60-degree angles are called sextiles, and they're very favorable angles, and they're just easy, and they're breezy, and they're fun. So that's one of the predominant forces that we have to note here. Something else that's important about November is that we're pretty much past the most emotional, dramatic parts of the eclipses. So eclipse news can come in up to 6 weeks before eclipses. It can come in after the eclipse is about up to 6 weeks. But now as we're moving into November, most of, if not all of the major eclipse news will have come in. So for better or worse, you have your news, you've gone through the emotions for better or worse, and now we move into November with the new peace, the new balance that comes from the big changes. So that's something else to note about the energy of November. You know, it's just more calm and it's just more peaceful. Something else that's always really important to remember about astrology and astrological reports is that astrologers doing horoscopes are talking about the general implications of the energies at play. General. We can't see your specific chart, and you may have a series of challenges in your natal chart, your personal chart, the one closest to you, while everything in the cosmos is all green lights and awesome. Or it could be the opposite. There could be all these challenges in the stars and you're like, nothing can touch me. I'm cruising along, you know, and you might have these series of wonderful transits in your personal chart. So astrology in this form has a major limitation in the way that we can't account for superseding factors in your natal chart or your other charts that are close to you. But these are all pieces of information. They're layers of the total truth, you know. There's nothing that's really as simple as just one layer. Everything is a multi-dimensional experience. And so with looking at astrological forecasts, we look at all these different layers, and some of the layers jive with each other and they flow and create synergy, and some of them conflict with one another and create smooth things here and then bumpy things here all at the same time, you know, and the entire complexity of the universe is wrapped up in each individual's experience and in each individual's being. That's what's so exciting about astrology. That's what's so maddening about astrology, you know, when you think you have something figured out, there's some other caveat or some other layer that is kind of throwing off, trying, you know, having to have it be simple. So in any case, so we're free from the eclipse dramas, we're free from the personal planets being retrograde, we've got a lot of green lights for the first 3 weeks, and then even at the end of the month, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the details of the challenges that come at the end of the month, but even within them, there's a series of favorable angles that are in between these challenging angles. So it's kind of like, I'm likening it to, you're on this car trip, you have all green lights, then you hit that one red light that sets off your flow. So now you're kind of hitting the red lights, but you've got some nice scenery, or you have some good company in the car while you're hitting that awkwardness in your flow. You know, so there's something positive, something smoothening. It's not a word, but it's a word now, right? It's something that offsets some of the awkwardness with these favorable angles being intermittently interspersed in between the challenges. So it's a really great month in that way, you know, that there's sweetness even in the parts that are challenged, and all of those are towards the end of the month. So some of the other general energy of the month is I'm calling it depth and breadth. Okay, so one of the perks that you get when you sign up for my free email newsletter and become part of my community is I do a monthly write-up a month before the upcoming month, and I talk about the general implications and go into some specific details, like for instance, a lot of the sextiles that are occurring. I go into some of the energy of each of those sextiles so that you better understand them, things I don't have time to do in the video. But in any case, I titled the name of this article or blog for November, Depth and Breadth, to really describe the energy, because there's all of these aspects occurring with the planet Pluto or in the sign of Scorpio, which really brings our depth. And then we've got all of these aspects either with the planet Jupiter or Sagittarius. So Jupiter rules Sagittarius, Pluto rules Scorpio. So between the sign and the planet that rules it, these two energies are predominating, and the Sag is the breadth, it's the width, it's the expansion, it's the going wider, and the Scorpio is going deeper. So that's the energy of this month, you know, where there's a lot of moving sideways and there's a lot of moving inward. So it's very active in that way. On November 2nd, we start out the month with, I'm not going, like I said before, I'm not going to go into all of these sextiles here. I have them in written version in the article, which you get when you sign up whenever, because it gets sent retrospectively if you sign up after I send it to you. So November 2nd, Venus and Mars make a conjunction. And Venus and Mars are these, you know, star-crossed lovers that always want to get together in the sky. And when they do, there's just pure magic. So there's magic in the sign that they get together in, which is Virgo. And there's magic in the houses that they get together in, which are going to be seen in the drill down of your horoscope chart and are going to possibly be in a separate place in your natal chart. So the sign and the houses are highlighted with this union. But in any case, this is just the classic coming together of female and male energies. In general, this is a super sweet experience. Because it's in Virgo, sometimes criticism or, you know, over-analysis can come with the power of the union. Anytime two planets get together, they expand their energy, they multiply their energy, they amplify each other's energy. So with that being in Virgo, we do have to look out a little bit for that critical eye. So if around that time in the beginning of the month, you see that you're judging someone harshly, try to soften that a little bit, you know, and that can offset the negative aspects of, or the negative potentials of the aspect. So then we've got our series of sextiles, and then we have November 11th, we have a new moon in Scorpio. So the new moons are this time for new chapters, new beginnings, new openings, planting seeds. There's a fantastic book that I love. It's written by Jan Spiller, S-P-I-L-L-E-R. She's written many wonderful astrology books, but this one is called New Moon Astrology, and she teaches you how to use the power of new moon wishes to create the life that you want. And she says you've got 10 wishes on each new moon, and that the more you gear your wishes towards the energy of the sign that the new moon is in, the more power they have. So anything Scorpio related or 8th house related, which is the energy of collaboration, it rules money, sex, and power is, you know, like the tagline of Scorpio, but there's so much more to it when you drill down into the energies of each of those headings. There's anything having to do with shared resources, money, loans, debt, inheritances, sweepstakes, winnings, spousal support, familial support. Basically, it's other people's money. And this is also one of the houses of the deep psychological studies. So psychology is here, astrology is here. Astrology is in a couple of places in the chart, but this is one of them, the psychological aspect of astrology. So deep esoteric studies are here. So anything in the order of mysteries or deep studies or psychological things, or esoteric topics, or things having to do with money or intimacy or merging or marriage, either romantic marriage or business marriage or both. Those are the kind of things that you want to wish for around this new moon. Then we have on November 18th, Pisces, Neptune in Pisces going direct. The outer planets are retrograde for long periods of time. It's not, I mean, it may seem like Mercury or Venus or Mars is retrograde for way too long, way too often, but they're retrograde nowhere near as long at a time as these outer planets are. So Neptune has been retrograde for a long time, and now it is moving forward. So Neptune rules the dream world. It rules the cosmic soup, basically the place where we're one. So dreams, meditations, abstract art, communing with things that are not in this dimension, those kind of things. And this is one of our other psychological houses, the house of the deep unconscious. Hypnosis, past life regression, things like that are all housed here. This is also called the house of incarceration, because this is the energy where we incarcerate ourselves with our minds and within our minds. And sometimes that incarceration turns outward and is experienced in an external way in an actual institution, But the energy of being trapped by your mental constructs is this energy of the 12th house. So when Neptune goes direct, the capacity to make more tangible or to make more clear all of these abstract energies, or to bring into form these abstract energies, is increased. And especially people who have strong Pisces in their chart, Sun in Pisces, Moon in Pisces, Ascendant in Pisces, you always want to specifically watch what your ruler is doing, because that's going to affect you more than other planets and what they're doing in general. You know, of course, like I said earlier, depending on what's hitting off in your personal chart, there could be some caveats to that. But you want to watch that very closely if you're a Pisces or have a lot of Pisces in your chart. But all of us will be affected by it. So then, November 23rd is when our series of challenging aspects starts, and the first one is an opposition with Venus to Uranus. Opposition energy is antagonistic. It's pulling and pushing against one another. Now, in a higher version, a transcendent version of an opposition, you can transcend or find balance or make partners of the opposing forces. And as spiritual ninjas, what I always call the way of the spiritual ninja, we have this choice to either have the belief that we're being victimized by life and that life is happening to us, or that we take an active role in our destiny and we're co-creating through our conscious looking at our unconsciousness and how our inner issues are being played out in the world around us. So this opposition energy really activates that chance to be a spiritual ninja, because sometimes, you know, it's really easy to be a spiritual ninja when everything is super smooth and super easy and, you know, there's all green lights. But it's those times when you've got a wrench thrown in your plan or something like that, that when you really have a chance to define your character and refine your practice. So then we've got the full moon in Gemini, and full moons always bring something to fruition or completion or fullness. Often there's drama or a big loud yell for focus on something. And again, that scene rolls out in the sign, the energy of Gemini, and it also rolls out in the house that the full moon is. And those are the kind of things I'll be drilling down into your each sign's reading for the month. So make sure you go and listen to your rising sign and at least your rising sign and your sun sign for the month of November, because there's all kinds of things specific to your sign that we're not covering in this video. So this full moon in Gemini brings this fullness to all things Gemini, and that has to do with how you transport yourself, your actual mobility, the state of being mobile, what you're mobile with, your communication. Mercury rules the third house, and so any of the things that Mercury rules is going to be, or most of the things that Mercury rules is going to be encapsulated in this energy of Gemini. Mercury has two sides, and one of those is also in Virgo, so Mercury has some other aspects that go into the Virgo place. But a lot of the expression of Mercury is actually in the third house, which is ruled by Gemini. So anything having to do with communication, transportation, this is also having to do with your neighborhood. It has to do with your relatives that are not your parents or kids, so cousins, siblings, aunts, uncles, etc. I always like to leave a little space around the full moon for things, especially when it's a full moon eclipse. You might notice this, I've talked about this before if you've listened to my videos, that the eclipse energies, the full moons or new moons where there's also an eclipse, that's like a new moon or full moon in triplicate. So there tends to be 3 times the manifestations, there tends to be 3 times the intensity of the opening or the closing or whatever, you know, whichever aspect we're talking about. But just when we have our regular cycles of a full moon, there's some emotion, you know? I always think of it like a dog when they come out of the water, like shaking the water off of them, and the water represents emotions. So we have all this emotional buildup in our energy fields. And when the full moon comes, it's like we're shaking it off, and whoever's around is going to get wet, you know, depending on how we deal with it. So if you leave a little space around the full moon, then when the thing comes up for you to have to deal with or address, or even, sometimes it's a happy manifestation that you just want to be present with. Something comes to fruition or completion that's a wonderful thing that you've been waiting for and working towards. That you have the space to just sit with it and enjoy it, you know? Sometimes you can feel that energy 2 to 3 days before. I often feel it 2 to 3 days before, and sometimes with the eclipse energies, even 5 or 6 days before, where it's really, really powerful. You might find, if you're watching the rhythms, that you can't sleep. Usually 2 nights before the full moon, I can't sleep at all. And I'm laying in bed saying, what's wrong with me? What's happening right now? I'm like, oh, right, of course. The full moon is almost here, and my body is just completely wide awake. My mind is completely wide awake. So if you know this rhythm and you pay attention to the rhythm, then you can set yourself up for not having a bunch of stuff to do the next day that you know you're not going to be sleeping, things like that. So then November 26th through the 29th, we have this energy of the sun making a conjunction to Saturn, and then the sun squaring Neptune, and then Saturn squaring Neptune. So when a planet that moves pretty quickly, like the sun, makes an aspect with an outer planet, the length of time of the influence is not as long as when 2 outer planets make an aspect to one another. So when we're talking about the sun, we're usually talking about several days worth of an influence. If you're talking about the sun with an outer planet, maybe it's 5 or 6 days or a week. But when you're talking about like Saturn, which is slow-moving planet, has a 28 to 30-year orbit, and Neptune, which has, gosh, like a 114-year orbit, something like that. When these planets are making an aspect to one another, it's not just a day, it's not just a week, it's a theme that's going on that can last a while. So we have at the end of this month some energies that are short-term in nature, involving square, you know, a challenging angle. And we also have a longer term story that took a little longer to start and it'll take a little longer to wear off. Like I talked about before, when there's a challenging angle like an opposition or a square is a 90-degree angle, it's a challenging angle, there's this experience of challenge, difficulty. But within that lies the potential for transmutation, transcendence, and the pairing and making allies of these opposing forces. So at the same time that Saturn and Neptune are which is being amplified by the sun, part of how the sun is involved here is that the sun amplifies anything it's near. So everything I'm about to talk about with Saturn and Neptune is just amplified that much more because the sun's presence in this interaction. So Saturn rules this energy of kind of stodginess, of slowness. It's called the taskmaster and the lord of karma. So there's a lot of rigidity and inflexibility there. With Neptune, there's this energy of abstract looseness, not clarity, kind of obscureness. So when you have these things in conflict, there could be challenging manifestations, like for instance, the topic of internet security. So the energy of realism, Saturn, being brought to the internet space of this cosmic soup of Neptune, that Neptune is part ruling here. So the topics of how safe your information is and how social media, the real story behind what's happening there is a big theme that is being brought up by this aspect. Now, at the same time as that's a challenge that's being brought up, the challenge can bring positive outcomes, especially if you are your spiritual ninja, you have your attitude of the spiritual ninja, and you feel, okay, how am I going to make this challenge or this difficulty something positive and be better off for it? So the more proactive you are with the energies of the aspect, the more you can offset the potential challenges because you're working with the energies consciously. So it's sometimes less of a need for something to come and blindside you to say, hey, wake up, look at this. If you're already looking at it, sometimes you experience the manifestations a little bit softer, which everybody kind of wants, right? So something else beneficial that can happen with a square is they can kind of, the planets in question can kind of erode at each other's extreme nature. So every planet, every sign, every placement has a range of potential expression, from lowest vibration to highest vibration, from negative to positive. There's this range of potentials. So if there's some negatives in the extreme nature of Saturn, and there's some negatives in the extreme nature of Neptune, when they're acting on this challenging angle, they're kind of eroding away at each other's extremes, bringing more balance, which is what life is all about, right? So whenever there's a conflict in the stars, sometimes it makes people ask bigger questions, which I think is part of the purpose of it. And it makes me think of the late Wayne Dyer. I still can't believe he's passed. It's like, he's been such a mentor and teacher to me for so long, so many of us. But there's a movie that he made before he transitioned called The Shift, a wonderful movie. And in it, he's talking about not dying with your music still in you. We all have our specific symphony within us that comes out in a way that it doesn't come out through anybody else. And people like Wayne Dyer, people asking bigger questions, are trying to coax out of us our beauty into the world. And these challenging aspects erode at the resistance to just being what we are and being what we came here to be. So something else that he says that I think is really cool to keep in mind when there's challenges, he said that you're supported in your first 9 months of life, right? You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to worry about anything. You didn't have to ask for anything or signal anyone about anything, although I'm sure babies are talking to us all the time, signaling things. But in any case, we're just completely taken care of. And so he says, why do we think that once we are birthed into the world that full support has gone away? And the answer that he says, and that I also believe, is that it hasn't. There's a universal abundance that wants to be given to us, that when we tune into it, its ever-presence, it becomes more of a reality in our personal subjective experience. So, a third thing about these difficult aspects is something that I call the art of gentleness. Sometimes life, we experience it as really hard or harsh, and sometimes we feel like we have to act suddenly or fiercely in certain directions, but some of the wisdom of these difficult transits lies in just leaving a little bit of softness and room for everything to be right, the art of gentleness, and that can be manifested in many ways. So these are the general transits for the month. If you'd like to have more details about that, definitely sign up for my free email newsletter on my website at aspiritualspark.com, and definitely check out my self-development tools, very reasonably priced tools. Also, you can look into personal readings with me or one of my apprentices, my growing list of apprentices. And I hope you have a wonderful November. Take care. Bye.